Professor Josh Swamidass, thank you for joining us. And Professor Swamidass of Washington University in St. Louis is the founder of Peaceful Science. I have the privilege of working with him there as an advisor. He works as a scientist, like Professor Moorhead, very much of a polymath, doing all kinds of different explorations. He's a scientist who operates at the intersection of various disciplines with a concern to bring diverse groups and mindsets together. That's a passion of his. It's a real focus at Peaceful Science. His scientific and medical perspective will shine light on how we need to think differently about how churches congregate and also work and engage for the foreseeable future. So Josh, thank you for joining us today at New Wine Tastings.
Thanks for having me.
So Josh, you are a scientist and a Christian. Your work at Peaceful Science is, as I quote, all about making space for difference with the civic practice of science. While people debate the import and the impact of COVID-19, it's hard to imagine things ever going back to the old normal before the virus set in. This includes consideration of the church's own future pertaining to large group gatherings. Given your work in pathology and immunology and concern for human flourishing, how can the church best prepare for the future as it considers how to gather or how it gathers in groups of whatever size for the foreseeable future? Josh, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. And given what I'm about to say next, it's important to date my comments. This is July 2020. And the reason why it's important is that from a scientific point of view, from a medical point of view, I'm at Washington University, one of the leading medical hospitals or teaching hospitals in the country. We just actually don't know what the future holds. It's changing a great deal, even from week to week at times, and certainly from month to month. I've really never seen anything like that. And I've talked to my colleagues that have been in the field for a very long time. You know, they haven't either. So we don't really know what the future holds. And so that's a very uncomfortable place for institutions that tend to transcend these sorts of things, where we want stability when we're, you know, making a building purchase or setting policy for the long term. And we don't have that right now. And so I think one of the things that this is going to be calling out from the church is a wisdom that's rooted in patience, where we should be able to calm down, realize that this is a very difficult situation, that it's going to be costly, and there's going to be a real need to have empathy and care for the people that are the most hurt by it. And then also to have the wisdom to just realize that maybe even though it hurts us a great deal, there's actually people around us that are even more hurt by it than us. And to find that place of peace in the middle of some of the most chaotic times any of us have ever or will ever see. I think that's I think the situation. So what makes me concerned as a scientist? Well, there's recent data that's come out that showed that for example, in Spain and Italy, only about 5% of the population was infected over the last year. What that means is that, you know, if you think about 5% and all the damage that caused, all the death, the loss of property, loss of wealth, loss of life, you could multiply that times 20, and not what could be what's ahead of us if we're not careful. That is dramatic. Now you go to the United States, it's much less than that. I mean, it's the type of thing where it could be 100 times worse if we're not cautious. That's terrifying. There's a reason to have hope. Well, there is, because, you know, we have found that our actions collectively as society can impact things. And one of the most shocking things of all, to be honest, was statements from the NIH now coming out that there might actually be a vaccine by the end of the year. I don't know how to explain to you how unprecedented it would be and how shocking and how unexpected it would be if there was an effective vaccine available in less than a year. Nothing like this has happened in the history of the human race, if it happens, which could substantially really reduce the impact altogether, though we still have to wait till December. And so there's a great deal of uncertainty. Now think about those from all the different points of angles of view that you can think about. If we can't be patient till January, when a vaccine is available in the best case scenario, if we can't be patient about that, there could be a large amount of unnecessarily loss of life. And that's I think the types of questions that we really have to seriously think about and consider. So what else does this really call out, I think, for the church? I think this is an opportunity for us to think through what it means to really serve a city. Instead of thinking about how to conduct a service or to serve a congregation, how do we really step up as citizens of a city so we can be concerned not just about our rights, but also the rights of others, and not just the concerns that are going to affect us, but what's going on around us. I think those are the key things that this is calling out, and why it's so difficult, because it's not something any of us would do naturally, and it's something that we struggle with in the American church, to be honest. As bad as it's hitting us in the United States, we should have honestly far more concern for what's happening in Africa and India and all these other places. And maybe we might even get some more hope from there too. I think one of the things that's encouraged me the most as I look at our post-Christendom context in the United States, as we are in many ways moving into exile as a church in exile, is that, when you look at the church in India, when you look at the church in China, where they don't have power, where they're truly persecuted in a way that we can only analogize to our context. You can ask, what happens when the church is in that situation? Does it just dissolve and fall apart? Well, actually, no, the church thrives. And in fact, they might avoid many of the vices we have. And I think that that's the hopeful thing ahead as we think about what it means to live in a world, in a country where we don't control everything, and where we maybe have to learn to be okay with that and realize that Christ laid down power. Maybe we don't need it either.
Thank you, Josh. A lot of overlap and synthetic engagement already involving what you and John have said. And John talked about how, we're moving more and more toward the margins as a church in our society. Instead of having to have power, seize power, control, how do we learn to live in that context of sharing life, sharing space? And we're going to be going to